They sent him to the galaxy's most brutal prison, not to survive but to disappear, a place where hope was a myth and mercy was weakness. But what they didn't count on was that this human came not with vengeance, but with a wrench. His name was Jake Morrison, and within the rusting halls of Blackstone Penitentiary, he did the impossible. He fixed it, not just the systems, not just the air, but the people, the guards, the inmates, the very soul of the station, and in doing so, he turned a monument of suffering into a beacon of change. Welcome to Nightmare Station. The transport ship, Final Justice, approached Blackstone Penitentiary like a dying moth drawn to a flame that promised only destruction. Through the reinforced viewport, the prison facility loomed against the backdrop of the Kepler Nebula, its dark metal structure resembling a mechanical parasite that had burrowed deep into the asteroid designated as Punishment Rock 7. Blackstone wasn't just any prison, it was the place where the Galactic Federation sent beings they wanted to forget existed. The facility had earned its reputation through a combination of brutal efficiency and creative despair. Built into the heart of a dead asteroid, it offered no hope of escape, no possibility of rescue, and certainly no chance of redemption. The very rocks around it seemed to absorb light and hope in equal measure. Warden Crickstall stood in his observation tower, watching the approaching transport with the satisfaction of a predator eyeing fresh prey. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the dim emergency lighting, casting rainbow patterns across the walls that somehow managed to look menacing rather than beautiful. As a Vectarian, Crickstall had evolved from creatures that fed on the despair of others, and prison work suited his nature perfectly. Another delivery, he mused to his deputy, Commander Seklon, a hulking Braxian whose gray skin bore the scars of countless battles. Class 7 designation this time, a human from the Sol system. Seklon's four eyes narrowed with interest. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species knew them primarily through reputation, a young, aggressive race from a high-gravity death world who had somehow managed to survive and thrive despite their planet's attempts to kill them daily. "What's the charge?" Seklon asked, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Crickstall consulted his datapad, and his expression shifted to one of amusement. "Industrial sabotage. Apparently this one destroyed an entire manufacturing facility on Europa Station, cost the Stellar Mining Consortium billions of credits and put thousands out of work." The transport ship's docking clamps engaged with a metallic shriek that echoed through the facility's corridors. Throughout Blackstone, prisoners in their cells heard the sound and knew that someone new had arrived to share their misery. Most felt a grim satisfaction at the thought. In a place where hope was a luxury no one could afford, the arrival of fresh victims provided the only entertainment available. Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship with the calm demeanor of someone who had accepted his fate long ago. At first glance, he appeared unremarkable by galactic standards: average height, brown hair that needed cutting, and wearing the standard orange jumpsuit that marked him as a convicted felon. His hands were secured behind his back with quantum restraints, and neural dampeners ensured he couldn't access any enhanced abilities his species might possess. But his eyes told a different story. They held the steady gaze of someone who had seen problems that others considered impossible and had found ways to solve them anyway. As he looked around the docking bay, taking in the deteriorating infrastructure and improvised repairs, those eyes began calculating and analyzing with the precision of a master engineer. "Prisoner Morrison," barked Guard Captain Thexara, an insectoid being whose mandibles clicked with authority. "You will follow standard intake procedures. Any resistance will be met with immediate pacification." Jake nodded politely. "I understand, Captain. Thank you for explaining the process." The transport guards exchanged glances. They had spent 3 weeks in hyperspace with this human, and his consistent politeness had unnerved them more than any threats or violence might have. Dangerous prisoners were supposed to rage, plot, or despair. They weren't supposed to thank their captors and ask about their families. "He's been like this the entire journey," muttered Transport Supervisor Yexsmith to Captain Thexara. "Polite, cooperative, even helpful when we had that power fluctuation in Section C. Fixed it in under an hour with nothing but spare parts and what he called basic engineering principles." Thexara's compound eyes studied the human with new interest. Most prisoners arrived at Blackstone broken, desperate, or defiant. This one seemed oddly at peace, as if he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. The intake process at Blackstone had been designed to crush any remaining spirit a prisoner might possess. Jake was stripped, decontaminated, and subjected to every scan and probe the facility's medical bay could provide. Through it all, he remained cooperative and even curious about the various alien technologies being used on him. "This biometric scanner is fascinating," Jake commented to medical technician Veltar, an amphibious being whose species had perfected biological analysis centuries ago. "The way it maps neural pathways while simultaneously checking for genetic modifications is remarkably elegant. Did your people develop this themselves, or is it based on consortium technology?" Veltar paused in his work, surprised by the question. Most prisoners either remained silent during medical processing or hurled curses at anyone who came near them. He had never had one ask about the technical specifications of his equipment. "It's a hybrid design," Veltar found himself answering. "Developed by my people, but enhanced with Kethmoran neural mapping algorithms." "Brilliant adaptation," Jake said with genuine appreciation. "Combining biological intuition with quantum processing, your engineers must be incredibly skilled." By the time Jake's processing was complete, word had already begun to spread among the facility's staff. The new human prisoner was unlike anything they had encountered before. He didn't threaten, plead, or scheme. Instead, he showed genuine interest in their work and seemed to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of engineering principles that crossed species boundaries. Warden Krikstal personally oversaw Jake's assignment to Cell Block Omega, the facility's maximum security section reserved for the most dangerous inmates. The cells in Omega were designed to be barely habitable, with malfunctioning climate control, flickering lights, and a waste disposal system that had been broken for over 2 years. "Welcome to your new home, Morrison," Krikstal said as the force field activated, trapping Jake in a cell that would have driven most beings to madness within weeks. "I trust you'll find the accommodations to your liking." Jake looked around the cell, noting the cracked walls, the puddle of unidentifiable liquid in one corner, and the air recycling unit that wheezed with each labored breath. Instead of despair or anger, his expression showed only professional interest. "The foundation work is solid," Jake observed, running his hand along the wall. "Good choice using metamorphic rock composite. The structural integrity is excellent, though you've got some serious maintenance issues with the environmental systems." Krikstal's crystalline features twisted into confusion. "What?" "Oh, sorry," Jake said, turning to face the warden with an apologetic smile. "Occupational hazard. I'm an engineer, so I tend to analyze everything from a technical perspective. This facility is actually quite impressive from an architectural standpoint. Building a self-sustaining prison inside an asteroid required some serious planning and innovation." For the first time in his career as warden, Krikstal found himself at a loss for words. Prisoners were supposed to break when they saw their cells, not offer professional critiques of the construction quality. "You're insane," Krikstal finally managed. "No, just pragmatic," Jake replied. "I'm going to be living here for a while, so I might as well understand how everything works. Speaking of which, would it be possible to get some basic tools? I noticed the air recycling unit is operating at about 60% efficiency. With a few simple adjustments, I could probably get it running much better." "Tools?" Krikstal's voice rose to a pitch that made several nearby guards wince. "You want me to give a convicted saboteur access to tools?" Jake considered this for a moment. "I understand your concern, but the current air quality in this cell block is actually hazardous to everyone, not just the prisoners. Carbon dioxide levels are nearly 30% above recommended safety standards, and there's a concerning buildup of trace toxins that suggests the filtration system needs immediate attention." Guard Supervisor Nexoth, who had been quietly listening to this exchange, felt a chill run down his spine. He had been experiencing headaches and fatigue for months, symptoms he had attributed to the stress of working in maximum security. But if the human was right about the air quality— "You're bluffing," Krikstal snarled, "trying to manipulate us into giving you access to tools so you can plan an escape." Jake shook his head. "Warden, I'm going to be breathing this air every day for the rest of my sentence. If I were planning to escape, would I really start by pointing out problems that affect my own health and safety?" The logic was undeniable, and it made Krikstal even more uncomfortable. He had built his career on understanding how prisoners thought, what motivated them, and how to break their spirits. But this human operated on principles he couldn't comprehend. "Besides," Jake continued, settling onto his narrow bunk, "where would I escape to? We're in the middle of deep space on a dead asteroid. Even if I could somehow get past all your security measures, there's nowhere to go. I'm not going anywhere, so I might as well try to make this place a little more livable for everyone." As the warden and his guards left cell block Omega, they carried with them a profound sense of unease. In all their years of dealing with the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, none of them had ever encountered a prisoner who seemed genuinely concerned about the welfare of his captors. That night, as Jake settled in for his first sleep in Blackstone Penitentiary, the facility's ancient systems groaned and wheezed around him. The air recycling unit in his cell struggled through another labored cycle. The lights flickered with irregular rhythm, and somewhere in the distance, a cooling system made sounds that suggested it was held together primarily by hope and spare parts. To most prisoners, these sounds would have been a symphony of despair, a constant reminder of their hopeless situation. But to Jake Morrison, they represented something entirely different, problems waiting to be solved. And tomorrow, he would begin the process of solving them, one system at a time, whether his captors wanted him to or not. In his office high above the cell blocks, Warden Crickstall stared out at the starfield beyond his viewport and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. He had received thousands of prisoners over the years, each one following predictable patterns of behavior. They threatened, pleaded, schemed, or despaired. They did not analyze construction techniques and offer maintenance advice. For the first time since becoming warden, Crickstall began to wonder if he might have bitten off more than he could chew. And in the depths of cell block Omega, Jake Morrison was already planning improvements to a facility that had been designed to crush hope itself. The galaxy's most feared prison was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable human problem solver met challenges that everyone else had simply accepted as unsolvable. The transformation of Blackstone Penitentiary was about to begin, and neither the warden nor his staff had any idea what they were in for. Building bridges in broken places. 3 weeks into Jake Morrison's imprisonment at Blackstone Penitentiary, the facility's staff had begun to notice changes that defied all logical explanation. It started with small things that could easily be dismissed as coincidence. The air recycling unit in cell block Omega, which had wheezed and struggled for months, suddenly began operating with smooth efficiency. The persistent drip in the waste disposal system that had driven prisoners to madness with its irregular rhythm had mysteriously stopped. Even the lighting, which had flickered constantly due to power fluctuations, now provided steady illumination. Guard Supervisor Nexoth was the first to investigate these anomalies. As he made his rounds through the maximum security section, he found himself breathing easier than he had in months. The headaches that had plagued him for so long had vanished, and his chronic fatigue seemed to be lifting. When he checked the environmental readings, he discovered that air quality throughout cell block Omega had improved dramatically. The mystery deepened when security footage revealed the impossible truth. During the night shift, when the cell blocks were supposedly locked down tight, prisoner Morrison could be seen moving freely through the corridors. But instead of attempting escape or violence, he was systematically repairing the facility's failing infrastructure using nothing but improvised tools and spare parts scavenged from maintenance areas. "This is impossible," muttered Chief Engineer Zeph Ika as she reviewed the recordings. As an insectoid Kethran, her species had evolved advanced technical abilities over millions of years. Yet she found herself struggling to understand how a primitive human had accomplished repairs that her own team had deemed impossible without complete system replacement. The recordings showed Jake carefully dismantling the air recycling unit's filtration array, cleaning components with improvised solutions and reassembling everything with modifications that improved efficiency by 40%. He had somehow bypassed 3 separate security locks, reprogrammed the environmental control systems, and done it all without triggering a single alarm. "How is he getting out of his cell?" demanded Warden Crickstall when the security recordings were brought to his attention. Captain Thexara's mandibles clicked nervously as she reviewed the data. "The force field logs show no interruptions, sir. According to our sensors, prisoner Morrison never left his cell." "Then explain how he's wandering around the facility like he owns the place." The answer came from an unexpected source. Deputy Warden Seklon, whose Braxian heritage included enhanced sensory perception, had been conducting his own investigation. His findings were both fascinating and deeply unsettling. "He's not bypassing our security," Seklon reported during the morning staff briefing. "He's improving it. Every system he touches becomes more efficient, more secure, and more reliable. It's as if he's treating the entire facility as an engineering project that needs optimization." "That's absurd," Crickstall snapped. "No prisoner helps maintain the facility that holds him captive." "This one does," Seklon replied grimly. "And he's teaching others to do the same." The revelation that Jake was somehow educating the facility's staff came to light when maintenance technician Vorlen approached Chief Engineer Zeph Ika with a solution to the persistent power fluctuations in Section C. Vorlin, typically struggled with complex technical problems, had somehow developed an elegant fix using what he called load-balancing principles. "Where did you learn this technique?" Zefika asked, studying the surprisingly sophisticated solution. "The human taught me," Vorlin admitted reluctantly. He explained it during his exercise period, said it was basic electrical engineering from his homeworld. Zefika's compound eyes widened in disbelief. The solution Vorlin had proposed was far from basic by any species standards. It demonstrated an understanding of power distribution theory that exceeded her own advanced training. Yet somehow, this human prisoner had explained it in terms simple enough for a junior technician to grasp and implement. Word of Jake's informal engineering lessons began to spread throughout the facility's staff. During meal breaks, guards and technicians found themselves gravitating towards Cell Block Omega, where the human prisoner had somehow established regular discussion sessions through the food delivery slots. Jake seemed to possess an infinite patience for explaining complex concepts using analogies and examples that transcended species barriers. "Think of it like water flowing through pipes," Jake explained to a group of guards who were struggling with the facility's malfunctioning hydraulic systems. "Pressure builds up when the flow is restricted, just like data backing up in a communication network. You need to identify the bottlenecks and either clear them or create alternate pathways." Guard Nalaveth, an aquatic Myrthian whose natural understanding of fluid dynamics made her particularly receptive to Jake's explanations, found herself implementing his suggestions throughout the facility's water reclamation systems. Within days, the chronic shortages that had plagued Blackstone for years were completely resolved. "He's turning maintenance into a teaching opportunity," she reported to her supervisor. "Every repair becomes a lesson in engineering principles. It's like having a master craftsman sharing trade secrets." The transformation wasn't limited to technical improvements. Jake's presence had begun to affect the social dynamics of the facility in ways that worried Warden Crickstall. Staff members who had barely spoken to each other outside of official duties were now collaborating on projects, sharing knowledge, and working together with an efficiency that the facility had never experienced. Crystalline entity Torvenix, whose species communicated primarily through harmonic resonance, had always struggled to interface with the facility's carbon-based staff. But Jake had somehow taught him to modulate his natural frequencies to improve communication clarity, turning what had been a source of constant frustration into an advantage. "The human understands that efficiency comes from cooperation," Torvenix resonated to his colleagues during a maintenance briefing. "His techniques work because they account for the strengths of each species rather than trying to force everyone into identical roles." As improvements continued to accumulate throughout Blackstone, the facility began operating at levels of efficiency that exceeded its original design specifications. Systems that had been failing for years suddenly performed better than when they were new. Problems that the staff had simply accepted as unsolvable were resolved with elegant solutions that seemed obvious in hindsight. But the most significant change was in the staff themselves. The atmosphere of despair and resignation that had characterized Blackstone for decades was giving way to something unprecedented: hope. Workers who had viewed their jobs as exercises in futility now approached each day with enthusiasm, eager to implement new techniques and tackle fresh challenges. The transformation came to Warden Crickstall's attention in a particularly dramatic way when the facility's main power core, which had been operating at barely 60% capacity, suddenly surged to full output. The improvement was so dramatic that emergency protocols were triggered, and the entire facility went into lockdown mode. "What happened?" Crickstall demanded as his engineering team scrambled to assess the situation. Chief Engineer Zefika reviewed the data with growing amazement. "Sir, the power core isn't malfunctioning. It's performing better than manufacturer specifications. Efficiency is up 37%, waste heat is down by half, and the harmonic resonance patterns have stabilized completely." "How is that possible?" According to the maintenance logs, Prisoner Morrison provided technical guidance for recalibrating the dilithium matrix alignment. His calculations were so precise that our quantum engineers are calling them revolutionary. Crickstall felt his crystalline structure vibrate with frustration. "You're telling me that a human prisoner has single-handedly solved engineering problems that have stumped our best technicians for years?" "Not single-handedly," Zefika corrected. "He's been training our staff, sharing techniques, and providing guidance. It's collaborative problem-solving on a scale I've never seen before." The final straw came when Crickstall discovered that Jake had somehow gained access to the facility's central computer systems and was conducting what could only be described as a comprehensive optimization analysis. Security alerts flooded the warden's console as unauthorized modifications were detected throughout the network. "Shut it down," Crickstall ordered. Lock out all external access and confine that human to solitary. But when the security team arrived at Jake's cell, they found him sitting calmly on his bunk, reading a technical manual that someone had provided. The cell's force field was active, the locks were secure, and according to all sensors, he had never left the confined space. "Warden," Jake said politely as Krikstal arrived with a full security escort. "I hope you don't mind the system updates. I noticed some inefficiencies in the data routing protocols and took the liberty of implementing some improvements. Nothing major, just basic optimization." "The explosion that killed 17 workers," Seklon accused. Jake's expression grew pained. "The explosion that would have killed thousands if the facility had gone online and failed during normal operations. Those 17 workers died because Stellar Mining tried to override my shutdown procedures and restart systems that weren't safe to operate." The engineering team exchanged glances, recognizing in Jake's story the same dedication to safety and functionality that had driven his work at Blackstone. He hadn't been sabotaging systems, he had been trying to save lives. "The Galactic Council investigation that followed validated every concern I had raised," Jake continued. "Stellar Mining Consortium was dissolved, their executives were prosecuted, and new safety standards were implemented across the sector. But I was still convicted of sabotage because the legal system needed someone to blame for the deaths." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Jake Morrison wasn't a dangerous criminal who had been rehabilitated by imprisonment. He was a dedicated engineer who had been wrongly convicted for trying to prevent a disaster. "Sir," Chief Engineer Zephaika addressed Warden Krikstal formally, "I recommend that we submit a formal review request to the Galactic Justice Council. Based on what we've observed of prisoner Morrison's character and capabilities, there may be grounds for appealing his conviction." "That's not your decision to make," Krikstal replied, but his tone lacked its usual authority. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Admiral Veltara of the Galactic Justice Council strode into the engineering bay, her ceremonial robes marking her as one of the highest authorities in the galactic legal system. "Warden Krikstal," she announced formally, "I'm here to conduct an emergency inspection of this facility. We've received reports of unusual activities that require investigation." Krikstal's crystalline features paled as he realized the implications. Someone had reported the changes at Blackstone to the galactic authorities. "Admiral," he began, but Veltara raised a hand to silence him. "More specifically, I'm here to investigate reports that this facility has achieved unprecedented improvements in operational efficiency, staff satisfaction, and safety standards. Such dramatic changes typically indicate either massive resource investment or significant policy violations." She looked around the engineering bay, taking note of the diverse team of staff members working together with obvious competence and enthusiasm. "I'm also here to investigate allegations that a prisoner convicted of industrial sabotage has been given inappropriate access to critical facility systems." All eyes turned to Jake, who stood calmly beside the control panels that had just saved everyone's lives. "That would be me, Admiral," Jake said respectfully. "Jake Morrison, currently serving a 20-year sentence for industrial sabotage." Admiral Veltara studied him with the sharp gaze of someone trained to evaluate character and competence. "You're the engineer who exposed the Stellar Mining Consortium safety violations." "Yes, ma'am. Your case has been under review by the Justice Council's Special Investigations Division. We've been conducting a comprehensive analysis of the Europa Station incident." She produced a datapad and consulted it briefly. "Our investigation has concluded that your actions prevented a catastrophic failure that would have resulted in thousands of casualties. The destruction of the Europa Station facility was caused by Stellar Mining Consortium's decision to override safety protocols, not by your sabotage of those systems." The words hung in the air like a judgment from the gods themselves. "Furthermore," Admiral Veltara continued, "our review of your imprisonment here has revealed that you have consistently demonstrated exceptional character, technical competence, and dedication to the welfare of others. Warden Krikstal, your staff reports indicate that prisoner Morrison has single-handedly transformed this facility from one of the worst-performing institutions in the system to a model of efficiency and cooperation." Krikstal found himself unable to speak as months of assumptions and prejudices crumbled around him. "Jake Morrison," Admiral Veltara announced formally, "by the authority of the Galactic Justice Council, your conviction for industrial sabotage is hereby overturned. All charges are dismissed, and you are free to go." The engineering bay erupted in cheers from the staff members who had come to respect and depend on Jake's expertise, but the Admiral wasn't finished. Additionally, The Justice Council is prepared to offer you a position as Chief Engineering Consultant for Facility Improvement and Safety. Your work here has demonstrated the potential for transforming correctional institutions throughout the galaxy. From prisoner to partner. The life support crisis at Blackstone Penitentiary had escalated beyond anyone's worst projections. What had begun as routine maintenance alerts had evolved into a cascading system failure that threatened to turn the asteroid prison into a massive tomb. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through corridors filled with the acrid smell of overheating equipment, while backup power systems strained under loads they were never designed to handle. Jake Morrison stood in the facility's central engineering bay, surrounded by diagnostic displays that painted a grim picture of their situation. The quantum catalytic converters that processed organic waste into breathable atmosphere were operating at critical temperatures. Biofiltration arrays responsible for water purification were breaking down faster than replacement parts could be fabricated. Most critically, the atmospheric processors that maintained oxygen levels throughout the facility were showing signs of imminent catastrophic failure. "We have maybe 60 hours before the air becomes unbreathable," reported Chief Engineer Zefika, her insectoid features tight with stress. 40 hours before water supplies become contaminated beyond safe consumption limits. Around them, the engineering team that had assembled represented the best technical minds at Blackstone. Guard Captain Thexara brought expertise in security systems integration. Maintenance technician Vorlen understood the facility's improvised repair history better than anyone. Crystalline entity Torvenix provided harmonic analysis capabilities that could detect structural flaws invisible to other diagnostic methods. Dr. Pelnari contributed biological systems knowledge essential for life support operations. Jake studied the assembled team with the calm focus of someone who had faced impossible engineering challenges before. "We're not just dealing with equipment failure," he announced. "This is a cascade event triggered by decades of deferred maintenance and incompatible system modifications." "Meaning what exactly?" demanded Deputy Warden Seklan, whose gray Braxian features showed skepticism despite the crisis. "Meaning your previous engineers have been solving individual problems without considering how their solutions affect other systems," Jake explained, pulling up a holographic display of the facility's interconnected infrastructure. "Every repair has created new stress points. Every upgrade has introduced compatibility issues. The facility is essentially held together by a network of engineering compromises that have finally reached their breaking point." The display showed Blackstone's systems as a complex web of connections, with critical failure points highlighted in alarming red. But Jake's analysis went deeper, revealing patterns that none of the facility's engineers had recognized. "Look at the power distribution network," Jake continued, manipulating the hologram to show energy flow patterns. "The quantum catalytic converters are drawing 40% more power than their rated capacity because they're compensating for inefficiencies in the biofiltration arrays. The biofilters are working overtime because the atmospheric processors aren't maintaining proper chemical balance. And the atmospheric processors are struggling because the power grid can't provide stable current due to load variations from the catalytic converters." "It's a feedback loop," Zefika realized, her compound eyes widening with understanding. "Each system's problems are making the others worse." "Exactly. But that also means we can reverse the process if we address the root causes in the right sequence." Jake's fingers danced across the control interfaces with the confidence of someone who understood not just what each system did, but how they were supposed to work together. His human engineering perspective, shaped by a species that had learned to solve problems with limited resources and imperfect equipment, proved ideally suited to the challenge. "First, we need to stabilize power distribution," Jake announced, his hands already moving to implement changes. "Torvenix, I need you to modulate the crystalline resonance patterns in the main power conduits. The harmonic frequencies are creating interference that's destabilizing the quantum field generators." The crystalline entity's natural resonance abilities had always been considered a communication tool, but Jake had recognized their potential for precise frequency modulation. As Torvenix began generating carefully tuned harmonic patterns, power fluctuations throughout the facility began to stabilize. "Vorlen, you're going to reconfigure the load balancing systems using the principles we discussed last week. Remember, think of it like traffic flow management. We need to route power demands around bottlenecks instead of trying to force everything through the main channels." The maintenance technician, who had struggled with complex systems for years, found that Jake's teaching methods had given him new confidence. His hands moved surely across control panels that had once intimidated him, implementing solutions that demonstrated deep understanding of power management theory. "Captain Thexara," We need to modify the security system power draws. I know that sounds dangerous, but trust me, the current configuration is creating power spikes every time the force fields cycle. We can maintain full security with 30% less energy consumption if we stagger the refresh sequences. As each team member implemented Jake's guidance, the cascading failure began to slow. Power stabilization allowed the atmospheric processors to operate within normal parameters. Reduced load on the biofiltration arrays meant they could begin catching up with contamination levels. The quantum catalytic converters, no longer straining against power fluctuations, began operating at design efficiency, but the most remarkable transformation was in the team itself. Engineers who had worked in isolation for years found themselves collaborating with unprecedented effectiveness. Jake's teaching style had shown them how to communicate across species barriers, share knowledge, and build on each other's strengths. The water purification systems are stabilizing, reported Dr. Pelnari, monitoring biological contamination levels. Particulate filtration is back within acceptable ranges. Atmospheric composition is normalizing throughout all sections, added Zafika. Oxygen levels steady, carbon dioxide declining toward optimal. As the immediate crisis passed, the assembled team began to realize what they had accomplished. In less than 12 hours, they had not only prevented catastrophic system failure, but had actually improved the facility's overall performance beyond previous benchmarks. "How did you know this would work?" asked Seklon, his skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Jake smiled, finally allowing himself to relax as the last warning indicator shifted from red to green. "Because I've seen this pattern before. On Europa Station, where I supposedly committed sabotage." The mention of Jake's conviction brought sudden tension to the room. For hours they had worked together as colleagues, but the reminder of his criminal status created an uncomfortable shift in dynamics. "Europa Station," Warden Krickstall repeated, having arrived to assess the crisis resolution. "Where you destroyed a manufacturing facility." "Where I exposed a manufacturing facility that was built to fail," Jake corrected quietly. Stellar Mining Consortium had cut costs by using substandard components and incompatible systems. The facility was a disaster waiting to happen, and when it inevitably failed, thousands of colonists would have died. The parallels to Blackstone's situation were unmistakable. Both facilities had been compromised by cost-cutting measures, incompatible systems, and deferred maintenance. Both had been on the verge of catastrophic failure that would have cost lives. "I tried to report the problems through proper channels," Jake continued. "Safety violations, construction shortcuts, systems integration failures. But Stellar Mining had too much invested in the project to admit it was fundamentally flawed." "So you destroyed it," Krickstall stated. "I documented everything," Jake replied. "Every safety violation, every corner that had been cut, every life-threatening compromise. Then I triggered a controlled shutdown that revealed all the problems in a way that couldn't be ignored or covered up." "The explosion that killed 17 workers," Seklon accused. Jake's expression grew pained. "The explosion that would have killed thousands if the facility had gone online and failed during normal operations. Those 17 workers died because Stellar Mining tried to override my shutdown procedures and restart systems that weren't safe to operate." The engineering team exchanged glances, recognizing in Jake's story the same dedication to safety and functionality that had driven his work at Blackstone. He hadn't been sabotaging systems, he had been trying to save lives. "The Galactic Council investigation that followed validated every concern I had raised," Jake continued. "Stellar Mining Consortium was dissolved, their executives were prosecuted, and new safety standards were implemented across the sector. But I was still convicted of sabotage because the legal system needed someone to blame for the deaths." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Jake Morrison wasn't a dangerous criminal who had been rehabilitated by imprisonment. He was a dedicated engineer who had been wrongly convicted for trying to prevent a disaster. "Sir," Chief Engineer Zephaika addressed Warden Krickstall formally, "I recommend that we submit a formal review request to the Galactic Justice Council. Based on what we've observed of prisoner Morrison's character and capabilities, there may be grounds for appealing his conviction." "That's not your decision to make," Krickstall replied, but his tone lacked its usual authority. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Admiral Veltara of the Galactic Justice Council strode into the engineering bay, her ceremonial robes marking her as one of the highest authorities in the galactic legal system. "Warden Krickstall," she announced formally. "I'm here to conduct an emergency inspection of this facility. We've received reports of unusual activities that require investigation." Krickstall's crystalline features paled as he realized the implications. Someone had reported the changes at Blackstone to the galactic authorities. "Admiral," he began, but Veltara raised a hand to silence him. "More specifically, I'm here to investigate reports that this facility has achieved unprecedented improvements in operational efficiency, staff satisfaction, and safety standards. Such dramatic changes typically indicate either massive resource investment or significant policy violations." She looked around the engineering bay, taking note of the diverse team of staff members working together with obvious competence and enthusiasm. "I'm also here to investigate allegations that a prisoner convicted of industrial sabotage has been given inappropriate access to critical facility systems." All eyes turned to Jake, who stood calmly beside the control panels that had just saved everyone's lives. "That would be me, Admiral," Jake said respectfully. "Jake Morrison, currently serving a 20-year sentence for industrial sabotage." Admiral Veltara studied him with the sharp gaze of someone trained to evaluate character and competence. "You're the engineer who exposed the Stellar Mining Consortium safety violations." "Yes, ma'am. Your case has been under review by the Justice Council's Special Investigations Division. We've been conducting a comprehensive analysis of the Europa Station incident." She produced a datapad and consulted it briefly. "Our investigation has concluded that your actions prevented a catastrophic failure that would have resulted in thousands of casualties. The destruction of the Europa Station facility was caused by Stellar Mining Consortium's decision to override safety protocols, not by your sabotage of those systems." The words hung in the air like a judgment from the gods themselves. "Furthermore," Admiral Veltara continued, "our review of your imprisonment here has revealed that you have consistently demonstrated exceptional character, technical competence, and dedication to the welfare of others. Warden Crickstall, your staff reports indicate that prisoner Morrison has single-handedly transformed this facility from one of the worst-performing institutions in the system to a model of efficiency and cooperation." Crickstall found himself unable to speak as months of assumptions and prejudices crumbled around him. "Jake Morrison," Admiral Veltara announced formally, "by the authority of the Galactic Justice Council, your conviction for industrial sabotage is hereby overturned. All charges are dismissed, and you are free to go." The engineering bay erupted in cheers from the staff members who had come to respect and depend on Jake's expertise, but the Admiral wasn't finished. "Additionally, the Justice Council is prepared to offer you a position as Chief Engineering Consultant for Facility Improvement and Safety. Your work here has demonstrated the potential for transforming correctional institutions throughout the galaxy." Jake looked around at the team that had become his friends and colleagues, at the facility that had become his greatest engineering challenge, and at the future that suddenly stretched before him filled with possibilities he had never imagined. "I accept," he said simply. "But I'd like to request that my first assignment be to complete the improvements we've started here at Blackstone. This team has incredible potential, and I think we've only scratched the surface of what we can accomplish together." 6 months later, Blackstone Penitentiary had become the most sought-after assignment in the galactic corrections system. The facility that had once been a byword for despair had become a center for innovation, rehabilitation, and hope. Former Warden Crickstall, demoted but not dismissed, served as deputy administrator under Jake's supervision, learning leadership techniques that emphasized cooperation over control. The transformation of Blackstone became a model copied throughout the galaxy, proving that even the most broken systems could be repaired when approached with the right combination of technical skill, human ingenuity, and genuine care for the welfare of others. And at the heart of it all was the recognition that problems weren't obstacles to be endured, but challenges to be solved by people working together toward common goals. Jake Morrison had entered Blackstone Penitentiary as the galaxy's most dangerous prisoner. He left as its most valuable asset, carrying with him the proof that redemption wasn't just possible, but inevitable when people were given the tools and opportunity to build something better than what they had inherited.